You know, so people say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God?
Jordan Peterson, the architect of resentment. Introduction, the siren song. In an age of anxiety, a siren song called out to the disenchanted, the lonely and the searching. Its melody was one of order amidst chaos, of meaning in the void, of personal responsibility, and a culture of blame. The singer was Jordan Peterson, a Canadian psychology professor who emerged from academic obscurity to become a global phenomenon.
Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why are you...
Why were they here? Well, how can I answer
Are there...
that?
He presented himself as a lighthouse, a defender of free speech, a guide through mythological landscapes, a father figure for a generation of young men yearning for a map to navigate a world that seemed to have turned against them. But this is not a story of salvation. It is a story of a seduction. A story of how a diagnosis of modern malaise became a catalyst for a far more ancient and dangerous impulse, the politics of resentment. This is a story of how the guide became the gatekeeper to a world of bitterness. Part 1. The alluring diagnosis, a map for a lost generation. Peterson's initial appeal was profound because it spoke to a genuine hunger. His message, drawn from Jungian archetypes and biblical stories reframed as metaphorical truths, was not merely self-help, it was a cosmology. He framed existence as a heroic struggle between order and chaos, and his 12 rules were a compass for that journey. Clean your room, stand up straight with your shoulders back. These were not just instructions, they were incantations against meaninglessness. They offered agency. For millions adrift in a sea of postmodern uncertainty and identity politics, Peterson was a lifeline, pulling them toward the solid ground of personal responsibility. He spoke with urgency about the perils of resentment, calling it a terrible hybrid of anger and self-pity, a poison that corrodes the soul. He presented himself as a physician for the modern spirit, diagnosing a sickness he promised to cure. Part 2. The cracks in the foundation. Ideology in scholars' clothing. Yet from the very beginning, the edifice was built on unstable ground. His fiery opposition to Canada's Bill C-16, which he falsely claimed would jail people for misgendering, was not a defense of free speech, but dramatic misrepresentation of it. It was the first major crack, revealing a propensity for alarmism over accuracy. This pattern deepened. He began to dismiss well-documented historical forces, systemic sexism, white privilege, as appalling theories concocted by postmodern neo-Marxists. His sophisticated language masked a simplistic worldview. All societal problems were merely the sum of individual failings. The complex system nature of power and injustice was erased to serve a narrative of individualist struggle. The scholar was slowly being eclipsed by the polemicist. Part 3. The Metamorphosis. The interviews of alignment. The true metamorphosis, however, is catalogued in his choice of companions and conversations. The man who once graced university lecture halls now curates a studio for the far right. At his Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference, an event critics dubbed as an alt-right heaven, he sat in concert with Nigel Farage. Together they performed a symphony of denial, dismissing the climate crisis as apocalypse mongering. Peterson, the former Harvard lecturer, championed the unfettered burning of fossil fuels, a stunning embrace of anti-scientific zealotry. On the Joe Rogan Experience, the psychologist became the pathologizer. Confronted with criticism of his pro-Israel stance, he did not engage with arguments. Instead, he reached for the diagnostic and statistical manual, claiming his critics were likely among a psychologically disordered 4 to 5% of the population, exhibiting dark tetrad traits: narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and sadism. Dissent was no longer a difference of opinion, it was a symptom of mental illness. On Sean Hannity's Fox News, the free speech absolutist performed his most stunning contortion. He now criticised online anonymity as a conduit for extremism, promoting a report that framed sincere Christian expression as potential hate speech. The man who built his name defending speech was now policing it, angering former allies who accused him of betrayal. And in his fawning interview with Benjamin Netanyahu,
There seems to be something intrinsic to our notion of valid ownership, that if you're going to occupy a territory, you actually have to do something with it that's productive. That's at least part of the claim you're making at the moment, to buttress the notion that the Jewish people have a valid claim to the present territory. There were a lot of movement back and forth,
Yes,
but the Jews have actually taken the land and made something of it.
Well, I'm saying something else, though. I'm saying that they held the land for 2,000 years, were kicked out. The Arabs came and conquered it and immediately lost it to others and did nothing with it. So it was basically, they took over my apartment, okay, a long time ago. The guys who took over, who basically kicked me out, were kicked out themselves. The apartment was left barren, and many decades, in this case centuries later, I come back to this barren mess, okay, this ruin, and I build it up back. I not only improve it, I not only make my ownership based on improvement, but that nobody else did anything with it.
The intellectual journey reached its terminus. There were no tough questions about occupation or apartheid, only soft psychological deference. Leahy would shed this pretense entirely, publicly urging the Prime Minister to give Palestinians hell. The guide had become a cheerleader for authority. Part 4. The Unravelling. The Prophet Consumed by Fire. The carefully constructed persona could not hold. The unravelling was public and profound. The Jubilee debate revealed not a sage, but a man irritable, evasive, and intellectually bankrupt, a shadow of the commanding lecturer he once was. The hypocrisy became impossible to ignore. The apostle of responsibility was beset by very public personal crises. The clinical psychologist, when presented with a woman's trauma, responded not with empathy, but with cold suspicion, questioning her credibility in his own book. The man who rallied against cultural Marxism from stages at £1,500 a ticket, conferences for elites, had become the very thing he purported to oppose. A merchant of grievance, selling tickets to a fire he was actively stoking. Part 5. The High Priest of Bitterness, a theology of resentment. So what is the end goal of this journey? The answer lies not in psychology, but in philosophy. Thinker Byung-Chul Han describes our era as an achievement society, where we are not oppressed by another, but by our own compulsion to optimize, perform, and succeed. The result is a profound exhaustion, a deep cellular bitterness. Jordan Peterson did not create this world, but he became its most eloquent high priest. His solution to this exhaustion is not mercy, not community, not grace. It is more brutal self-enforcement. His rules are a liturgy for the never-ending struggle, and when that internal war becomes unbearable, the bitterness must be expunged. It requires a scapegoat. This is Peterson's ultimate function, to provide the targets, the postmodernists, the feminists, the woke, the psychopathic critics. He is a master cartographer of resentment, drawing detailed maps that lead his followers to the doors of their enemies. His envisioned future is not a free society, but a well-ordered hierarchy of the bitter, forever at war with the phantoms he has so convincingly conjured. Conclusion: the empty altar. Jordan Peterson promised a return to order, but he was only ever an architect of chaos. He promised to slay dragons, but only taught his followers to breathe fire. He identified a genuine hunger for meaning, and then satiated it with the empty calories of resentment. His story is a tragic allegory for our time, a warning that the most dangerous guides are those who correctly diagnose a disease only to feed it. He is a case study in how the search for meaning, untethered from truth and compassion, curdles into its opposite. He is not a lighthouse, he is a siren on the rocks, and his song is a requiem for the very hope he once promised.